It's 2002. Crash Bandicoot was once the lifeblood of mascot platformers on the PS1, but with the transition to PS2, also came a tumultuous time for the spin-dazed marsupial, as he was tugged from new developer to new developer, and released what could best be described as diminishing return. Nowhere near the heyday of his initial trilogy, this created something of a power vacuum to be the new face of PlayStation as far as the platforming genre go, with many throwing their hat into the ring with attitude-toting animal-like would-be video game icons. Among them was the ring-tailed bandit, Sly Cooper. Sly sometimes bleeds into the background of PlayStation mascots that just aren't quite, but there's a lot that distinguishes him. While the first Sly game is largely a straightforward platformer that mostly took advantage of Sly's position as a thief for aesthetic and thematic use, Sly 2 onward blazed a trail unlike any other, reframing the game's structure around the objective of a heist, feeling less like Sly was going from point A to point B, and more as if he were stacking resources as they became germane in a large hub world, gradually introducing new allies with different skills to fuel what would become a video game simulator of those convoluted multi-tier Danny Ocean heist plans, and they're fantastic. Though quite often it wasn't what Sly was stealing or how that was the most interesting aspect of these vignettes, so much as who he was stealing from. Sly opposed a myriad of diverse rogues, one of the most enticing elements of every game in the Sly saga being the gratification of uncovering each rival in each episode Sly would make a goal out of stealing from, the modus operandi being stealing. Sly's disposition puts him in a moral gray area, at least in relation to his adversaries, in that quite frequently, Sly isn't necessarily a hero vanquishing a villain, but one thief stealing from another. There is of course a personal narrative that gives Sly a moral high ground more often than not. His squaring off with the likes of the Fearsome Five, the Claw Gang, and other furry syndicates frequently feels like a matter of competition, at least of one-upsmanship in the sport, if not art, of being a thief. This is the pseudo-competition that Sly engages his rivals in via the unique structure of these games. The format of each villain being the focus of an episode drops Sly into the domain cultivated by that antagonist, creating a larger-than-life feeling wherein Sly is but a small inkling in a massive machine that begets each villain's wickedness. This is the expedited way Sly can develop its villains, because each step of the heist plan Sly and his friends create involve exploiting whatever sparing weak spots they can locate in each villain's agenda, from their primary means of defense and security to their leisurely daily routine. Rajan the Tiger's inability to resist his favorite watermelons to Miss Decibel's peerless ire for rock and roll. These weaknesses aren't just superficial cracks in the character's armor, but it tells us a good deal about them. Being a thief, Sly's means are largely covert. Many missions surround him needing to remain silent as he stalks his rival and listens in on their conversations and gathers intel, placing these villains as a focal point in a way video game villains rarely are, outside of conventions like cutscenes and boss fights. Video games being a medium that largely rely on occurring from the player's point of view, such focus on an opponent in many corners is unprecedented in the scale Sly displays in spades, let alone in broad distribution as the Sly series manages, with 5 or so rogues per installment.
Well, when the people come to see me sing, I want to make sure they keep a-coming.
Even if they don't feel it.
One way or the other, there be opera fans again.
Bullseye! I'll post the Clockwork Talons as a trophy. That should bring in the competition.
Head back to the safe house. We need to talk about these lumberjack games.
Once we get that loot back into present day... Aye! Toothpick! Going to be worth millions! Oops.
The result is a slew of malleable faces that we as players get to see in a variety of roles, both in a literal vocational sense as well as a narrative one, as quite often, Sly will come to think of former enemies as allies should motive and necessity overlap. The developments bestowed to Dimitri and the Panda King in particular, by their turn from heels to faces, are some of the series' most enriching. That's not to say every enemy is a friend Sly hasn't made yet. Quite the contrary is true, as you'll often experience. Sly 3 wastes no time in establishing the cutthroat nature of its main villain, Dr. M.
Afraid I poisoned your drink at lunch. Sorry, Richards, but I don't tolerate poor performance. You should have changed the security code from 123 after you installed the new system.
I'll improve, I swear!
No, you'll die any second now.
Holy hell. And even with how amply these characters were often developed just on their own merit, one could glean yet more influence from their excellent designs. Such a great avenue of a cast of anthropomorphic animals is that it makes character illustration so intuitive and telling. Some are fairly straightforward, such as the Panda King being one of China's most notable native animals and directly alluding to the nation's rich history of martial arts and fireworks. But others can have a great deal beyond the surface to read into. Take Jean Bison, a buffalo who was born long ago in the frontier ages, who Captain America'd into our modern age after he was frozen solid in a gold mining accident. Bison is an interesting character because his menace doesn't stem from deliberate malice. He simply has not progressed from his own antiquated ideals. He's still strapping landforms with TNT and using his beloved industrial-era trains to smuggle goods to his fellow criminals. It's just how things were done back then. In his own time, Jean Bison was a hero, but like many heroes, his methods don't suit a modern day. He's a figure without appropriate peers or role models, and all this ties together with the fact that Bison, as his name suggests, is a bison, the western variety of buffalo, an animal with a history in the US of being drastically overhunted, especially during the same frontier era Jean Bison hails from. The size and begotten resources of a buffalo made them a highly fruitful commodity for survival, and they were killed for this reason in massive excess by settlers, to the point that bison would likely be extinct today if not for the conservation efforts taken to save them. The old adage, to go the way of the buffalo, means to gradually disappear, which Bison's way of life did, and just like the American bison, Bison was pulled from the clutches of potential disappearance. Jean Bison is back, but finds himself misplaced, behaving like a frontiersman in an era where it doesn't make sense to. Sly's rogues gallery is rich with inspirations like these, weaving cultural ideals of animals into fun, cartoony characters. Like the Contessa, a Black Widow spider, who puts the practice of matricide into action, making her a fascinating blend of the perspectives put upon literal spiders and fortune-seeking socialites. There's also Octavio, a lion with a passion for singing opera, which is an apt association considering lions have the loudest roar of any big cat at a whopping 114 decibels. Speaking of decibels, there's also Miss Decibel, an elephant who Sly bests in combat by fooling her into charging into electric generators and shocking her. And maybe my mind is in the gutter, but I'm unable to help but feel this may be a morbid reference to the fact that Thomas Edison would atrociously demonstrate his scientific advances by publicly executing elephants with electric charges. You think that's curt? How about the Chinese General Chicken, General Tso, named after the dish General Tso's chicken? I cannot believe he's a chicken named General Tso.
But she doesn't want to marry you.
She's a woman. She doesn't know up from down.
I cannot believe he's a chicken called General Tso when that's only the second most questionable thing about him. In tandem with the livelihoods that animal designs apply to these characters, there comes the principle that passion does not equate talent or success. A running theme in the Sly series, as many of the villains of Sly Cooper return to lives of crime after they were embittered by rejection. Be it by the world of the arts, their home culture, or their would-be social circles, these villains, as villains often are, were sculpted by ostracization, which is why their plots often revolve around living the fantasy they felt deprived of. Cads like Mugshot and Ms. Ruby grew up pushed around and bullied, which is why being career criminals where they can do the pushing suits them perfectly. Allowed by quite possibly the biggest reject of them all, Cyril Le Paradox, who carries his distinction considering he wanted to be a master thief in the first place, but failed at that. Being a skunk, Le Paradox's infamous odor made it impossible for him to manage the necessary cloaking of being a thief. And with his father thrown in jail before he could truly learn the family business, Le Paradox quickly found out he wasn't cut out for the criminal game until he got an education within the walls of his incarceration. From there, Le Paradox plotted to exact revenge on the Cooper clan, who he blames for the humiliation and arrest of his father, and this sort of pathetic background has made LaParadox something of a red-headed stepchild among Sly's rivals. He's actually my favorite of Sly's villains, because I kinda love the poetry of characters who became criminals because they sucked at arts or sports or socializing, and the kickstart of LaParadox's greatest criminal ploy was sucking at being a criminal. To the point that at Sly's urging, LaParadox could have used his mastery of time travel for safe big scores, but instead he went for petty revenge. It's not really about money for LaParadox. Spoken like a petulant, inexperienced criminal, it's all personal. And to some degree, that's the case for all of Sly's villains. Many video games see a boss encroach on a happy homeworld like the Mushroom Kingdom or the Insanity Isle, but Sly flips the script in that you are the antagonist. You are constantly infiltrating the space occupied by these villains and turning their world upside down. It's a fascinating dynamic that makes just about every rogue of Sly Cooper memorable by some standard. And speaking of memorability, isn't it about time the good folks at Sony remembered Sly? I think we're overdue for... Hey, who is that making a cameo in the newest Ratchet & Clank?